What's up, Squid Bois? As I take out this AI, the thought occurred to me that I have not discussed province morale and explained every aspect of it. And that's what the purpose of this video is. It's a very important topic. If you look at Spain here, who's still active, who's still a human player, and I click on his provinces, you'll see down here, his morale is at 72% in his home starting provinces. It just turned day 7. That shouldn't be happening. I click his user account. He's under the starting morale. He's at 63%. Spain has killed himself. And you can just tell by this province morale. Now, this is a huge part of the game. There's many aspects to it, like how to improve province morale, which we'll get into. But at first, I want to just name all the different morale buffs and negatives. So first, this is a great example. This AI is attacking me here in Gadari. If I were to click the province and click this icon here, now remember, I can't draw on the user interface that's about to pop up right here and draw at the same time. This is where you need to pay attention to. And at this icon, we can see it's broken up into 2 different sections. You have the morale trend, target morale, garrison strength, chance of uprising, morale, and rebellion risk. And then you have the morale influences. On the bottom of morale influences, you can see distance to capital, 0.4 days, -3. Distance to capital is how many days it would take to migrate to your capital. My capital is right here in Tripoli. If I were to take this province here, the distance to capital would be even greater. One way of mitigating distance to capital is centering your capital. Now, you shouldn't be doing this in the early game, but imagine we're France. Now, France has taken over Germany and England. If you wanted to maximize, thus minimizing the negative morale influence from distance to capital, you wouldn't put your capital here. You would put it more here in the center. Changing a capital is too expensive in the early game. If you go over here to any province, you could build a new capital here on the bottom. You don't want to be spending 10,000 materials on a new capital in the early game. And you don't want to put your capital too close to a front line. Imagine we were Russia and we expand this way and we expand this way and we take over here and we take over Lithuania and Ukraine. And we have all of this. And once we have all of this, and we know we're going to plunge into Central Europe, you want to move your capital here to a more centered location here, if you feel confident you can take it. And the reasoning is now you're centered here is more relevant to the distance of your empire and where your empire is going to expand. So you only build and transfer your capital once. Again, don't do this in the early game like France did. France moved their capital from Paris down to Marseilles. I look again and he's moving the capital again. You can see the capital being built. Fun fact, capitals, no matter who you are, can always be seen being built, which is very interesting. They're never a question mark. On a tangent with capitals, you also would like to move them if you were afraid they were going to get sacked. For example, my capital is on the coast. Mediterranean, which is awful. Next on morale influences is enemy armies. Now you can see it's -17. And you're like, how does Bytro come up with that crazy number? Why is it 17? Well, there's 17 units here. The max number is 30 in enemy morale. Now I've never seen this done, but I would imagine if you had a really long, oh, they're attacking. Good, I lost 7 and they lost 9. And I'm defending. Good. It is what it is. Now imagine you want to lower someone's morale. Pretend I don't own this and I'm only here with Orhan attacking this player. This has fortified. Pretend there's a lot more troops here and I want to just lower their morale. I could leave 30 infantry right here in a safe distance away from artillery fire and lower that morale. Now my troops' morale goes down too, but pretend we're dealing with hundreds of units. Setting 30 here just to, I imagine this is raiding and pillaging, right? Who knows? Could benefit lowering the morale of a province. But again, I've never seen anyone do that. But if I ever found an opportunity, I would. Next is enemy neighbors. So enemy neighbors is provinces that you're at war with. Now here you can see it's -20. Also with enemy armies, look, it went from -17 to -8. Enemy neighbors is -20. You can see that there's 4 province lines for 4 territories connected that are at war with me. Where down here you just have 1. I click this, enemy neighbors is -5. So for each province that's an enemy neighbor, you get -5 morale. Which means border provinces on the front line here and here are going to have a harder time getting that morale up compared to inner provinces over here, which are safe. Next, we're going to talk about morale influences that's a positive, and that's neighbors. Now, neighbors can be both positive and negative, but here's an example of positive. Here at Hun, we have a +10 in total influence, plus 10 in neighbors. And I'm surrounded by friendly territory, and there's 5 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 neighbors. I click at all these provinces. Here, 100%, 100%, 100%, 100%, 100%. High morale. For each province you're connected to that has high morale, you gain a +2. This shows that by increasing the morale in one province, you can help out your other provinces. We're here in Corfa. I have neighbors -4. Connected to 4 provinces, and they are all around 70%, so they give me both a -1. Now, what this means is you need to get the morale of all your provinces up. That way you can get neighbors as a positive influence, which will help out all your provinces as you expand. Next, we have the capital. Capital produces 10 morale. It's only on a capital province, and you can only have 1 capital at a time. Then there's harbor. Look at that. Harbor +10. Harbors increase morale. If I click at the harbor, you can see one of its side effects is morale development 10%. But what else can increase morale? Well, there's railroads. Railroads increase it by 15%. Harbors and railroads are your bread and butter. Harbors can only be built on the coast, and railroads can be built anywhere. Next, there's forts. Now, this fort is injured, but if we go to morale influences, we can see it gives it a +2. Looking at a level 1 fort, you can see the morale increases by 5%. That's not bad for the price of a fort. Now, I would only do this after building a railroad and a harbor and still needed a province morale to go up. But if I were to build forts just for morale development, we're talking about late game, where given that Russia example up here in the north, if you move your capital down here as you're expanding into Europe, the upper provinces here are going to be so far away that morale distance capital will be so negative. After you build railroads up here, you may need to just build forts to prop them up. After forts, there's only one other building type that increases morale, and that's the factory. Now, the factory is increasing it by 4%, but the advantage the factory and the fort has is they have multiple levels. Fort level 1 gives it 5%. Fort level 2 increases that 5 to 10. Fort level 3 again goes from 10 to 15, so another 5% gain. And fort level 4 does the same thing, 15 to 20, 5% gain. Forts can add a total of 20 morale, which is huge if you're playing a really large map and you've expanded and railroads aren't helping, not getting you up to that high target morale of 100%. Same for factories. Now, factory level 1 is 4%, factory level 2 is 8%, and so on. It will keep increasing by 4%. And those are what you need to focus on when you increase morale. Now, I'm building factories and railroads in my double resource provinces on this map. You can see them right here. And without discussing why you build where you build, let's just talk about the reason why you need morale up. Now, if I look at this tab here at daily production, if I were to count all the resources consumed, the province itself consumes 2,400 net resources. Right, for no reason. It's just the upkeep of the economy, of the local population. This place eats up 2,400 resources of my empire. Now, it gives me about 2,300 resources right now, but that's a net -100. I actually lose resources by owning this province. Now look at this province morale. This province morale is at 66%. That's pretty good. And I'm still losing resources. Now imagine you've just taken over someone and you have a bunch of provinces at 33%, at 25%. Right, you're going to be hurting. Look at this 37%. I'm losing about 900 resources just owning this province. Now that's why expansion is so hard in Supremacy 1914, because you're actually penalized by expanding. You have to actually hold the province for a while to get a good return on investment. Now, when I started this map, this was my starting location here. And as I grew, I took over the other Libya. And this other Libya, the morale is still not to a point where it's giving me a good amount of resources. Now, the double resource provinces are different. They actually do produce good resources, and that's why it's always nice to prioritize them. But the singles is what I want. If I can get all my singles up along with my doubles, I'll start really throwing a lot of resources into my war economy. The way to do that is while I'm expanding, I need to be looking at my target morale. So here you can see target morale. It's at 94. It's right between morale trend and garrison strength. I know just from experience that 94 will get to 100 because my neighbor's -5 will turn into pluses as the neighboring economy goes up. Because higher morale neighbors produces higher morale. I have higher morale here, which is a beacon of light and hope to my newly conquered territories. Now pretend this is the late game and target morale is 70. That's not a good target morale. And I need to be starting to build railroads, forts, harbors in those provinces. Now factories are great, don't get me wrong. But if you were to look at the factory cost, it's just so much for the lowest morale development. Railroads are 15, harbors are 10, forts are 5, and dirt cheap. A factory gives you 4. The main purpose of factories is to produce units, and you can also get resources from factories. The cost on investment and return on investment is really only seen in double resource provinces. Next, for morale influences, is shortages. I don't have one to show you, and I won't ever have one to show you because I don't get resource shortages. Now, if I were able to play and take over as Spain and see their morale trends, which are unknown, I would definitely assume that a shortage has occurred. Now, if you maintain a shortage and even your capital, Madrid, right, not 100%, it's 94%, is going down, you have to be seriously in trouble. Now, the issues with shortages is as it lowers all your provinces' morale, morale indicates how much resources are being produced. Right here at Salamanca, 84% morale means 84% of the total base resources can be produced. If you're going through a shortage day after day and your morale keeps going down, this base keeps going down. And if that base keeps going down, you've terminally killed yourself. Now, this happens all the time in this game, but that's one you have to worry about. Now, the last one, we're going to go through a time lapse. See one morale influence that I don't have, and it's the last one and the biggest one. Here I'm playing as Utah. I've taken out Colorado here, taken out Arizona down here, and I want to talk about the morale influences. I want to show you that I've taken over 10 more provinces for my 10 starting, so I have 20 provinces. I go over to morale influences, and you can see that this province has no negative expansion. Now, there's negative neighbors, that's fine. None of my provinces have the negative expansion morale influence modifier. But I go over here to the Europe 1914 map. I'm playing as France. I'm taking out Italy. You can see I'm taking them out right here with Hank. And I click my provinces, and I have 21 provinces here. And I click Florence, and I go to the morale section, and what do I see? I see expansion -4. Now, I have pretty much the same amount of provinces as my Utah game in Shattered America, but I have expansion -4 penalty. Now, why is that? Well, it's dependent on the map size. Now, as you expand, regardless of the map, if you get 50% of the provinces, you'll start getting up to -35 expansion morale. Yes, -35 expansion morale. Let me say that again, -35 expansion morale. And smaller maps, like this one, it's a 10-player map, has less provinces on the board. So when I take more provinces, my negative expansion morale gets up quicker to that -35. Now, that -35 should be a number that you are all afraid of if you ever want to have a solo victory. And the reason is railroads give you only 15% morale boost. Harbors only give you 10% morale boost. Combined, if you're on the coast, is only 25%. So if you think you are not going to build a railroad or a harbor in this game and ever get a solo victory, or be the leading member in your coalition, that you have to build railroads, harbors, forts, and factories. You have to position your capital in the center of your landmass when you start expanding too big. Because just like that negative expansion penalty, the same is true for distance to capital. I go back to Florence, my distance to capital is 0.5 days -7. Where I go to Denver here in my Utah Shattered America map, and the distance to capital at 0.5 days is -2, much lower. Obviously, the amount of provinces in this map is much larger. And if I were to take half of the provinces here, distance to capital keeps expanding the further you are away from your capital. Graham is -3. Capital's here. This is -2. This is -3. If this were the Europe 1914 map, it would be much larger. Florence was -4. This would be 5 or 6. But what this tells you is the bigger your map, the easier it is to expand. And that's why with these 500 player maps, it's so much easier to expand. Because half the territory is now this, and your distance to capital penalty much further time than compared to the Europe 1914 map. And now there's one more morale influence. I don't have an example, but it's losing your capital. Now, I've taken Rome from Italy. I'm building a railroad there. But if I look at what's left of Italy's morale here in Palermo, it's at 64%. Now, that's lower than the starting 70%. So we could say that Palermo is actually losing morale, which means they're losing resources, which means they're going to keep cycling over and getting bankrupt and bankrupt. And one of the biggest factors is losing your capital. Now, when you lose your capital, you get a morale hit, and the person who takes your capital gets a morale boost. So you could see here at one of my starting locations at Marseille's, my average morale is 88%, where next to me, my ally in Barcelona is at 83%. Taking that capital boosted my overall morale, and taking that capital lowered Italy's morale. Furthermore, there's a negative penalty for not having a capital that hits all your provinces. So if you are ever fighting an opponent and you need to just take out that killing blow, the capital is how you're going to do it, because it's going to ruin his economy. It's all going to keep going down, and you could sit back, regroup, build your armies up, and then do the finishing blow on him, because you'll outproduce him. Lastly, as we get into the late game, which I can mimic here in the early game in a small map like this, you have your economy stabilized, you have resources. Occasionally you're looking at your provinces and you're like, oh, Florence is not producing enough resources for me. 2,400 resources nets me even. I have 1965 here. I look at the target morale of Florence and I'm like, oh, Florence's target morale is 83. Well, 83% will get me over that hump, but I want 100%. Now, what's stopping me? Distance to capital is stopping me. Do I need to center my capital? No, it's too early in the game. I'm not going to center my capital and move closer to Florence. Neighbors, -8. -8 neighbors is something that will go away once all the morales of my neighbors increases. So I know that could be a temporary negative modifier if I bring up my morale. Expansion, -4. Well, I know expansion will keep increasing over time. So I know that I need to build a harbor or a railroad here in the mid to late game just to keep up my morale. And by keeping up my average morale high, I'm getting rid of that neighbor's -8. And I'm boosting the morale of my neighboring provinces. Just like if we look at Paris here, Paris is +7 neighbors. So by having high morale neighbors, you're increasing your morale. So after I build up my infrastructure and my economy and my double resource provinces that I've highlighted here, I'll start building them in areas that I need for my economy, and then I'll start building them in areas that are far away, like a harbor over here or a harbor over here, because they're so far away from my capital that I could boost the target morale and get it closer to 100%. Now in this map, if I were to keep expanding like I did, as you can see with the target morale, I'd go bankrupt. So don't do that. I'm going to expand into Austria-Hungary right now, or the Ottoman Empire, but I'm going to defend what I've gathered and build up that infrastructure so I can get that target morale up. And I know I'll be in a good spot when my average morale gets much higher. And if it's moving in that direction, I know I could start another invasion. I'll talk to Squid Bois later.